Welcome back to Nature Documentary for Sleep. If you enjoy this kind of quiet geography, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're arriving before sunrise at the Danxia Landforms, where mountains look painted because they're built in layers. The air is cold, the boardwalk is slick, and your job is to record the sound of rock being slowly undone. In the dim light, the ridges are muted, then the first sun hits and the stripes turn sharp, red and tan and gray. You step off the busy overlook onto a ranger-approved side path, close enough to see grains and small pebbles locked in sandstone. Up close, the color is just iron oxidation, the quiet rusting of old sediment left out in the open. And when the afternoon rain arrives, dust turns to paste, runoff concentrates fast, and gullies start cutting where the surface is weakest. Stay with me as we trace how Uplift exposes soft beds and why a short storm can trigger slumps along saturated clay-rich layers. What fails first here? The steepest channel walls? Or the bedding planes that turn slick once water finds the seams? You hear the first warning before you see it. A soft, dry skitter, like someone dragging sandpaper across a drum. It comes from below the path, down a slope that looks solid in the half-light. You lean the microphone over the railing anyway, because that is the job. The sound is grains letting go, one by one, the smallest kind of surrender. And then a pebble ticks twice and disappears into the dark. Congratulations, you have arrived in a landscape that is already falling apart. The ranger told you the side path was approved, not immortal. You keep your boots on the packed strip of gravel, and you do not test the edges, because the edges are made of loose sandstone pretending to be a cliff. A couple on the boardwalk laughs at the color, and they are not wrong. But they are laughing at the paint, not at the construction. This place is not a mural. It is a stack of old river dirt left too long in the sun. You unclip your recorder from your jacket, and the plastic is cold enough to sting. The wind picks up, and it smells metallic, like wet pennies that have not met the water yet. Somewhere down in the gullies, a loose plate shifts again, a little settling sigh. The first concrete escalation is simple, and it is physical. The side path narrows, and the next step is over a patch of red powder. It looks like normal dust until it stains your glove-like pigment. You plant your foot and the powder collapses into a soft pocket. Not a hole, not a trap, just a reminder that the ground is not committed. The ranger's voice comes back to you, flat and practiced. If it rains, get out of the channels. If it rains, do not stand under overhangs. If it rains, do not trust anything that looks like a clean plane of rock. You keep moving because standing still makes you colder. Also because standing still invites thoughts, and thoughts invite altitude sickness of the mind. The sun lifts another finger over the horizon, and the ridges ignite. Red turns to ember, tan turns to old paper, gray turns to ash. The stripes do not blend, and that is the unsettling part. Nature usually smudges her work. Here she filed it into layers and then walked away. You stop at a small exposure where the path cuts into the slope. Your headlamp catches tiny quartz grains, like sugar crystals in bread crust. There are pebbles too, rounded, smooth, not born on this ridge. They came from somewhere else, rolled by water, dropped, buried, and forgotten. You lift the microphone closer and brush the rock with 2 fingers. The sound is gritty, intimate, like rubbing 2 dry plates together. In the distance, on the main platform, someone's phone camera clicks. Up close, the cliff is porous, and your fingertip leaves a pale streak. That streak is not damage, not really. It is proof that this mountain is still sediment at heart. A new development arrives in the form of a sign you did not expect. Not a tourist placard, but a small metal stake in the ground. It has a tag and a number and a date, a monitoring point. Someone has been measuring the slope, watching it creep. The tag is scratched, but you can read enough to understand the implication. The park does not just display geology here, it manages it like a patient on a drip. A faint line runs down slope from the stake, a hairline crack in the surface. It is not wide enough to catch your boot, but it is wide enough to catch your attention. The crack follows a stripe, the boundary between beds. That boundary is the seam in the costume. If water finds it, the bed above can slide like a book off a shelf. You glance up, and for the first time you see the ridges as stacked pages. Some pages are thick, coarse, stubborn. Some pages are thin, clay-rich, and eager to turn into paste. You exhale into the cold, and your breath floats away, unbothered. A bird calls once, then stops, as if it heard itself and got embarrassed. You take a slow step forward, and the path bends around a small buttress. On the far side, the wind hits harder, funneled along the ridge. It carries fine grit that taps your jacket like faint rain, except there are no clouds yet, just a pale sky warming from black to blue. You lift the microphone into the wind, and the audio spikes. You angle it down, and suddenly the sound is different. Not wind, but abrasion. The hiss of sand moving across stone. It is the same sound you would hear if you slid a chair over concrete, except the chair is the atmosphere and the concrete is a mountain. Another development, and it comes with a decision. The side path splits around a roped-off patch of slope. One branch stays high along the ridge, exposed, clean, and dry. The other dips toward a narrow gully, shaded and quieter. Your assignment is to record quiet geology, not dramatic hiking noises. The gully will give you the soft sounds, the small movements. It will also put you in the exact place the ranger warned about. You pause long enough to hear your own pulse in your ears. Then you choose the gully route because you did not come here to record safety. You follow the rope line down, careful, 3 points of contact in spirit if not in practice. The temperature drops as you enter shadow. The air smells damp even though it is dry because the ground holds yesterday's cold. The walls close in and the stripes become taller than you. From up on the platform, these are colorful hills. From inside, they are a corridor of layered weakness. You place the microphone near the base of the wall and wait. At first you hear nothing, and the nothing is heavy. Then a tiny rattle, like a teaspoon in a cup, as a grain falls and hits another. You look up instinctively because humans always look up when something falls. The wall is fluted, carved into shallow grooves. The grooves are where water used to run, and will run again. They look like fingerprints left by a patient hand. You run your eyes along a darker band, almost purple when wet, the clay-rich layer. It is smooth compared to the gritty sandstone above. Smooth is not comfort. Smooth is a slip plane waiting for lubrication. The next development is evidence, and it is fresh. At the gully floor, there is a fan of rubble that looks newer than the rest. Angular fragments, sharp edges, no dust rounding them yet. A few pieces still wear their stripes, like torn fabric. You kneel beside it, and your knee sinks into fine sediment. The sediment is dry on top, cool and compact underneath. You pick up a chunk and turn it in your hand. It breaks along a bedding plane with almost no effort. The fracture is clean, like splitting a stale cookie. This is what people mean by fragile rock. Not that it cannot hold itself up today, but that it has already agreed to be something else tomorrow. You set the chunk back gently, as if returning a sleeping animal. A voice echoes faintly from the ridge above. Tourists arriving with morning energy. Their footsteps thump through the rock, carried as dull vibrations. It is strange to feel humans as seismic activity, but that is what you are, at least to the land. Just another load, temporary, noisy, and confident. You continue down the gully, following its slight bend. You keep expecting water, because gullies train you for water. But the bed is dry, patterned with tiny ripples in silt. Those ripples were made by flow, probably last rain, maybe 2 weeks ago. They are preserved like a message left on a refrigerator. Only this refrigerator is a canyon, and the message is, I was here. Another development arrives as the sun clears the ridge. A beam of light slides into the gully, and the wall colors shift. The reds deepen, the tans brighten, and the gray bands turn almost blue. Wetness would do that too, but this is just angle. It makes you wonder how much of what you call beauty is lighting logistics. You place the microphone where the light hits the wall and tap lightly with a fingernail. The sound is dull on the clay, sharper on the sandstone. Hard bed, soft bed, hard bed, soft bed. A rhythm you can feel in your fingertips. This rhythm is the reason for pillars and alcoves and the weird architecture above. The soft beds retreat, the hard beds overhang, and gravity does what gravity always does. It waits, bored, until the support is gone. You follow the gully deeper because the quiet is addictive. Here, even your breathing sounds intrusive. You step over a shallow crack in the floor and notice it aligns with one on the wall. A joint set, a natural fracture pattern. It slices through multiple layers, ignoring the stripes. The bedding planes are horizontal memory. The joints are vertical impatience. Where they intersect, blocks become separate arguments. Another escalation, and it is time. Your phone shows late morning and the forecast you downloaded last night. Clouds building afternoon, rain after 3. The ranger said, late afternoon, but weather enjoys being early. You look up at the strip of sky above the gully. It is still clear, but there is a haze, a whitening at the edge of blue. Moisture gathering, invisible, loading the air. You tell yourself you will turn around soon. You always tell yourself that in places like this. Then you go a little farther, because curiosity is a better engine than caution. You reach a spot where the gully narrows and the walls rise like stacked carpets. Here the sandstone is pebbly, a conglomerate bed. The pebbles are embedded like teeth in gum. Some are quartz, some are darker, volcanic perhaps. strangers from older mountains. They hint at a time when this was not a ridge, but a river channel, a river strong enough to carry stones, not just silt. That is the first big reveal, if you let it land. These stripes were not painted by a hand. They were deposited by moving water and wind, layer after layer, in a basin that used to be low. You are standing in a file cabinet of ancient floods, and now the cabinet has been tipped up into the air. That means uplift. Not a single dramatic shove, but millions of small motions, like a slow elevator you never asked to ride. Tectonics did this, faraway forces with no interest in your recording schedule. The land rose, the layers stayed mostly intact, and erosion got access. Erosion is the part you can hear. Uplift is the part you have to infer, like a crime you did not witness. Another development comes as you find an educational marker, half buried in sand. It is not for tourists, not here in the gully. It is a small painted rock, a field marker used by researchers, a dot of bright orange paint, and an arrow pointing toward a contact between layers. Someone mapped this seam because it matters. You crouch and look closely. The seam is thin, a darker line slightly recessed. Above it, sandstone grains are coarser, more angular. Below it, silt is finer, and when you rub it, it powders immediately. Different energy, different environment. A flood depositing sand, then a quiet season settling mud. Repeat that enough times and you get a barcode mountain. You record your voice low so it does not bounce too harshly off the walls. You describe sedimentation as a diary, time-stamped in grit. Each bed is a page, each page dried, compacted, cemented, and then raised up like evidence. If you could read it fluently, you would know the rhythm of ancient weather. But you are not fluent. You are a tired translator with a microphone, trying anyway. Another escalation arrives in your hands. Your fingertips come away red again, and this time you notice the stain is stronger. Not just dust, but iron oxide, fine as makeup. The rock is rusting in place, the way an old car rusts in a field. Except this car is a mountain, and the field is the atmosphere. Oxidation is slow, but it never clocks out. Even on a day with clear skies, the chemistry keeps working. That is why the reds are real, not painted. It is a chemical bruise across millions of grains. You stand and your knee creaks because you are not built of stone. You turn to look back up the gully and you notice something you missed before. The floor is not flat. It tilts subtly, and the tilt follows the bedding plane. The gully is aligned with structure, guided by weakness. Water is not creative in the way people want it to be. It is opportunistic. It goes where it is allowed. The next development is a small setback, and it is human. Your radio crackles, and the ranger's voice cuts through. They ask for your location. Calm but specific. A maintenance crew is closing a segment of the lower trail for stabilization work. Loose material, recent minor collapse. Nothing dramatic, but enough. You answer with the nearest named viewpoint, and then the truth. You are in the gully, off the side path, the approved one. There is a pause long enough to hear your own breathing again. Then the ranger tells you to start heading back toward the ridge route by noon. They repeat the storm timing and add a detail they did not mention earlier. The clay-rich beds here swell when wet, and they fail in sheets. Not pebbles, not grains, but whole slabs, like carpet sliding downstairs. You say you understand, because that is what you say. You do understand. You also want one more recording, just a little farther, where the gully bends into a pocket of deeper shade. You make a decision, and you narrate it to yourself like a contract. You will go to the bend, record for 10 minutes, then turn around. 10 minutes is a lie people tell to make risk feel measured. But sometimes it is a useful lie. You walk to the bend, and the air cools again. Here the walls are damp to the touch, not wet, just holding moisture. Your boot scuffs the floor, and a faint dust cloud rises, then settles quickly. The dust settles in a way that feels rehearsed, like it has done this for a few million years already. You angle your headlamp down, and the beam catches a faint sheen on the wall. Not water running, not even dripping, just a film of coolness trapped in pores. You press your palm against the rock, and the cold climbs into your skin. The sandstone does not feel like a cliff. It feels like a very old sponge that has forgotten how to be soft. You lift the microphone close, almost touching the wall, and you hold your breath. In the silence, you notice the smallest sound you have heard all day. A whispery tick, 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 like dry rice falling onto paper. It is coming from somewhere above you, not far. You tilt the microphone upward, and the ticking sharpens. A few grains, then a few more, then a pause. The wall is shedding, not dramatically, just constantly. This is what erosion looks like when it is being polite. You step forward into the bend, and the gully tightens around you. The sky overhead becomes a thin strip, pale and distant. The stripes on the wall feel closer now, like you could peel them off. You think you are walking through a canyon. Wrong. You are walking through a collapsed argument between layers, still in progress. You run your fingers along a pale band, and it powders immediately. The dust clings to your fingerprint ridges like it wants to become you. It smells faintly earthy, but also metallic, like damp iron. You whisper into the recorder because you cannot help yourself. You describe the layers as alternating moods, coarse and gritty, then fine and weak. You describe cross-bedding you can barely see, little slanted lines inside a bed. Those slants are old currents, frozen mid-move. They are proof that water once ran here with confidence. Now the water is gone, but the evidence kept the shape. You look down at your boots and notice the floor texture has changed. The silt here is smoother, almost polished, like it has been ironed. That usually means flow concentrated here. Scraping and sorting, you squat and drag one fingertip through it. The line holds for a moment, then the edges crumble inward. Even the gully floor cannot hold a memory for long. You check your phone again, and you do not like what you see. The time has slid past late morning. The signal is weak, but the forecast still insists on rain. The clouds icon looks harmless, like a cartoon apology. But you can feel the air changing, even down here. It is not colder yet. It is heavier. It presses on your sinuses the way a storm does. Quietly, personally, you stand and you listen for the ranger's voice on the radio. nothing, just static and then your own impatience. So, you do the only sensible thing in an unsensible place. You start walking back. Each step stirs a small puff of powder. The powder is redder here, and it stains the side of your boot. You wonder how long it would take for the whole mountain to walk away, grain by grain. The answer is always longer than your life, shorter than the planets. As you leave the bend, the gully opens slightly. You see the rubble fan again, the fresh, angular pieces. You pause beside it because you are trying to learn the speed of change. Fresh rock has a smell. If you get close enough, not perfume, not romance, just a mineral sharpness, like snapped chalk. You pick up another fragment, smaller this time, and rub it between thumb and forefinger. It grits, then it smooths, then it becomes dust. Congratulations, you have just participated in the landscape's long-term plan. You set the dust back on the ground, and it looks exactly like the ground. That is the trick here. Everything is always becoming everything else. You move up the gully, following the slight tilt you noticed earlier. Now that you are watching for it, you can see how the channel obeys the layers. It turns where the soft bed dips. It tightens where the hard bed resists. Water will take this route again because it has already trained the rock. You reach a spot where a joint crack slices through the wall. It is wider than you remember, or maybe you only noticed it now because fear sharpens eyesight. You lean in, and the crack is filled with fine sediment, packed like flour in a seam. That seam is a future failure, waiting for lubrication. You take a slow step past it anyway. Your shoulder almost brushes the wall, and you feel how close the rock is. You do not like being between two vertical faces in a storm country. You like open ground, exits, options. But gullies are seductive. They feel like shelter. They are not. They are funnels. You keep climbing gently, and the light shifts. The strip of sky above you is no longer crisp blue. It has a milky wash to it, like someone dragged a thin cloth over the sun. That is high moisture, gathering its courage. The wind begins to move through the channel in pulses. It comes, then fades, then comes again. It carries the smell of distant wetness. Not rain yet, just the promise of it. You reach the junction where the path split earlier. The rope line is still there, and the ridge route looks annoyingly exposed. The gully route looks quiet, shaded, and wrong. You climb toward the ridge. Each step up feels like leaving a throat. The air warms as you exit the channel. Sunlight hits your face, and you realize you have been squinting in shadow for too long. Up here, the Danxia looks like it did from the platform. Soft hills, clean stripes, orderly color. But now you know what it feels like inside. You know it is not orderly. It is layered, which is different. Order implies consent. Layering implies accumulation, then pressure, then time, then exposure. You walk along the ridge route, staying on the packed path. The wind is stronger up here. It pushes at your jacket and tries to steer you. It also gives you sound, which is what you came for. It whistles across edges, then breaks into a low roar over the wider slopes. You point the microphone down at the ground, and the roar becomes a hiss. It is sand and grit, sliding and tapping against stone. The mountain is being sand-blasted by weather that does not care about views. You pass a patch of sparse vegetation. low shrubs clinging to the slope. Their leaves are dusty, their stems bent, their roots doing unpaid labor. Plants here are not decorating the landscape. They are trying to staple it in place. And even they are losing, slowly, politely. The ranger appears ahead, coming toward you along the ridge. They look relaxed in the way people do when they have seen the same danger many times. They glance at your boots and then at your hands, red-stained. They do not scold you. They just nod once, like a doctor confirming you met the diagnosis. You fall into step beside them, and you both keep walking. They point with their chin toward a section of slope across the valley. From here, you can see the layers like stacked blankets, slightly tilted. The ranger tells you the tilt is why some faces fail more often than others. When the bedding planes dip out of the slope, the layers can slide. When they dip into the hill, the layers lock. It is the same rock, but a different geometry, and geometry decides what survives the rain. You ask, quietly, how often they see collapses. The ranger answers the way people answer uncomfortable questions. Often enough that they never stop watching. Not every day, not every week, but often enough that they place monitoring stakes and close trails and argue with tourists, because tourists think the rock is posing for them. The rock is not posing, it is failing at its own pace. You walk past a viewpoint spur and you can hear the crowd now. Voices, laughter, the slap of shoes on boardwalk planks. It sounds out of place, like a party in a library. The ranger keeps you on the ridge route, away from the edges. They tell you the storm will come in from the west, rolling over the higher ground. They tell you the first rain is not the problem. The problem is what happens after the first rain, when the surface seals. Fine sediment can form a crust like dried paint. Then the next rain cannot soak in. It runs off, fast, concentrated, carrying more than water. That is when gullies deepen and walls slump. You look back toward the gully you were in. From here, it looks harmless, like a crease in fabric. You feel a flicker of annoyance at how innocent it appears. The ranger points again, this time at small scallops on the slope. Tiny amphitheaters, shallow scars. They call them slumps, and they say they start small. A little undercutting at the base, a little water along a clay bed. Then the whole sheet lets go, because it has been waiting to. The ranger says the clay layers swell when wet. They expand, they lose strength, they become lubricated. Then the sandstone above, heavier and less forgiving, rides down. It is not a landslide like in the movies. It is a slow folding collapse, like wet cake sliding off a plate. You record their voice, careful to keep your microphone out of the wind. This is the human side of geology, the part that comes with rules. Do not go into channels. Do not go under overhangs. Do not trust smooth plains. It sounds like superstition until you understand the process. Then it becomes basic respect. The ridge route rises gently toward a broader bench. From here, you can see farther across the park. The striped ridges ripple outward. Layered waves, frozen mid-roll. In the distance, the main platform structures sit like little scaffolds. They are the human attempt to visit without touching, to stand close without being under anything, to look without becoming part of the sediment. The wind shifts and you feel it cool slightly. It is subtle, but your skin notices. The air is drawing in moisture. You taste dust on your teeth. You check the horizon, and now you can see the cloud bank. It is not towering yet, but it is organized. A low ceiling forming, gray with a darker underside. The ranger speeds up slightly, not running, just committing. You follow. The path crosses a small drainage line, dry for now, but the floor is lined with pebbles and bits of twig, stranded debris, evidence of flow, recent enough to remember. You stop for 1 second and point the microphone into the dry channel. You hear wind moving through it, making a hollow flute sound, a dry river practicing its voice for later. You keep going. The first drop hits your cheek like a tiny cold coin. Then another hits your hand. You look up and the sky has dimmed. The ridge colors, so loud in sun, go dull under cloud cover. The stripes are still there, but quieter, like someone turned down saturation. The ranger says, almost casually, "Here we go." The rain does not begin with a gentle patter. It begins with a hiss. The first drops vanish into the powder and make dark spots. Instantly, the dark spots spread, merging into a wet skin. The scent rises fast, that dust to mud smell, like waking earth. You crouch and touch the ground. It is slick already, a thin paste forming. Your fingertip comes away with red mud, heavier than dust. This is the moment the slope stops being a slope and becomes a surface. Water starts to run, not in streams yet, but in sheets, thin and fast. Seeking low points, the ranger gestures toward the bench, away from the gullies. You follow, oots sliding slightly on the new slickness. Your heart rate ticks up, not from exertion, from understanding. You have been studying weakness all morning. Now, the test has begun. The rain thickens in minutes. It drums on your jacket, sharp and irregular. The sound on the microphone is intense, a wash of static. You shield it with your body and angle it toward the ground. Now you can hear the important part. Water moving over sediment, picking it up, carrying it. A faint gritty whisper becomes a louder scrape as tiny grains start to roll. Sheet wash, the ranger says, like reading a recipe. Water spreads thin, then finds a groove, then becomes a rivulet. You watch it happen at your feet. A small depression collects flow, and suddenly it is a line. The line deepens, and the water turns from clear to orange. It has already eaten enough to stain itself. You take a step back, because you do not want to be standing on the first cut. The bench you are climbing toward is broader, safer, but not flat. Water runs across it too, but less concentrated. The ranger keeps glancing back toward the gully system. You do the same because you cannot help it. The mouth of the gully is out of sight from here, tucked behind a ridge fold, but you know exactly where it is, and you know what it will do when water arrives in volume. The rain becomes heavier, and the air fills with mist kicked up from impacts. The stripes darken as the rock wets, reds turning wine deep, tans turning clay rich. The landscape looks more alive, and that is not comforting. Water reveals the texture you could only guess at when it was dry. Clay layers look slick and shiny. Sandstone looks rougher, beaded with droplets. You can see the boundaries clearly, And you can also see them beginning to fail. A thin sheet of muddy water slides along one seam. It hesitates, then it jumps like it found a shortcut. That seam becomes a tiny slide, a miniature failure. A sheet of wet sediment moves a few centimeters, then stops. Not dramatic, but you feel it in your stomach anyway. The ranger tells you not to linger. They say the first failures are small, and then the slope learns what it can do. You move again, higher, toward the broader ridgeline. The wind rises with the rain, pushing it sideways. Droplets sting your face. Your breath fogs in front of you, not from cold, from saturation. You keep the microphone close, and you can hear runoff now. Tiny streams forming in the microchannels, braiding and separating. It sounds like paper tearing, softly, constantly. You reach a spot where the path crosses a shallow swale. It was dry earlier, just a gentle dip. Now water is collecting and cutting through it. Making a narrow channel, you watch the cut deepen in real time. The edge collapses in little bites, each one a soft plop. The ranger says, this is why boardwalks exist. Not for comfort, for containment. So people do not turn every dip into a gully with their feet. You think about that, and you feel the sardonic truth. Humans come here for fragile beauty. Then they compact the soil, break the crust, and help the water concentrate. We are not visitors. We are weather. With cameras, the radio crackles again, clearer now for some reason. A voice from the maintenance crew says a lower segment is closing immediately. They mention rising flow in one of the channels near the scenic route. The ranger answers, short, efficient. They tell you to keep moving to the main overlook bench, the safer high ground. You obey, because this is not the moment for curiosity to lead. But curiosity still tags along, panting. As you climb, you hear something new through the rain, a deeper sound, low and continuous. At first, it could be wind. Then it sharpens into a rumble that does not match the gust rhythm. The ranger stops, just for a second, and tilts their head. They do not like that sound either. It is coming from the gully system, the one you were in. You move faster, boots slipping, then catching. The path here is packed and maintained, but water makes everything negotiable. You reach the edge of a viewpoint bench, and from here, you can see down into a main drainage corridor. The gully you followed feeds into it, hidden until now by folds. And now you see it. Wake up! A surge of brown water pushes through the channel like an animal released. It is not tall, not a wall, but it is fast, foaming at the edges. It carries twigs, pebbles, and chunks of sediment that tumble like bread in soup. It makes a sound like heavy fabric being dragged, a flash flood in miniature, but real enough. You remember the dry ripples in the gully floor. Those ripples were not art. They were rehearsal marks. The surge slams into a bend where the channel undercuts a striped wall. The water scours the base, digging quickly, eating the support. You can see the wall above, saturated now, darker and heavier. For a moment, nothing happens, which is always the most dangerous moment. Then a crack appears, a line racing along a bedding plane. It opens like a zipper. The ranger grabs your arm and pulls you back from the bench edge. Not because you will be hit. You are too high for that. Because humans lean forward when they want to witness disaster. and leaning forward is how you fall into it. The wall section begins to move. At first, it is almost graceful, a slow sag. Then, the whole slice gives up at once. A sheet of striped hillside slides downward silently for a heartbeat, like it is surprised. Then, it accelerates and breaks, and the sound arrives. A deep, wet roar, muffled by rain, but heavy enough to feel in your ribs. Blocks shear along seams, turning into rubble mid-slide. The debris hits the channel and explodes into mud and fragments. The surge water bulks up instantly, thicker, darker, more loaded. The flood does not stop to admire what it has accomplished. It just carries the mountain away in pieces. You stand there, soaked, watching the landscape rewrite itself in less than a minute. This is the irreversible midpoint, whether you want one or not. The hillside you saw this morning, the neat stripes, the fluted walls, is now a fresh scar. Where the slide peeled away, a pale interior shows through, less oxidized, less red. It looks like the underside of skin. The fresh face of the slide is not as red because it has not had time to rust. It is raw sediment, newly exposed to air, like a cut that has not scabbed yet. You watch water lick at it immediately, because water never waits for permission. The ranger keeps a hand on your sleeve, not comforting, just controlling your center of gravity. You are standing on a bench that exists because this place cannot be trusted. The rain keeps coming, harder for a minute, then softer, then harder again. It does not feel like weather anymore. It feels like a decision being enforced. You tilt your microphone toward the channel, and the sound is thick and busy. There is the hiss of rainfall on rock layered over the growl of muddy flow. Every few seconds, you hear a heavier thunk, a stone colliding with another stone. That is bed load, the river dragging the landscape along its belly. It is not poetic. It is demolition with paperwork. You think you came to record quiet geology. Congratulations, you are recording active transport. The ranger points, low and quick, toward the head of the scar. A new crack has formed above the slide plane, a thin, dark line in wet rock. Secondary failures? The ranger says, like they are reading a checklist. After saturation, the slope adjusts in installments. The first collapse is not the end. It is the opening argument. You want to lean forward again because your brain loves a clean narrative, but the ranger moves you back another step, and you obey. Your boots scrape wet gravel, and you feel how close stability is to performance. The bench surface is engineered, compacted, slightly crowned to shed water. Even here, thin sheets of runoff are running around your feet. They find low spots, then stitch together into small threads. Within minutes, those threads carve lines into the fine sediment beside the path. A miniature gully begins, right next to a sign about staying on trails. Humans build borders, and water treats them as suggestions. The ranger talks into the radio again. They report the slump, the location, the increased turbidity, the debris in the channel. Their voice is calm, but the words are specific. Specific words are what you use when you want someone to take a closure seriously. The reply comes back, distorted by rain, and you catch the key phrase, route adjustment. They are moving people, rerouting foot traffic, closing a section before curiosity becomes casualty. You glance toward the main platform area, and you can just make out figures, Small silhouettes with bright jackets, clustered like ants around a spilled sugar pile. Some are still holding up phones, because of course they are. From a distance, a landslide looks like content. Up close, it looks like a schedule being erased. The storm keeps working the soft places, and it does not care who is watching. The ranger guides you along the bench, away from the edge, toward a slightly higher shoulder. You move carefully because the surface has turned slick in patches. Clay is doing what clay does, swelling, smoothing, becoming a lubricant. Sandstone is doing what sandstone does, shedding grains and pretending that is dignity. As you walk, you keep looking back at the scar. The pale interior is already darkening as water wets it. This is oxidation's cruel patience. It will repaint the wound over time. Give it seasons. Give it air. Give it thin films of moisture. The iron in the grains will react, and the reds will creep back in. But the shape will never return. Not in your lifetime. Erosion does not do refunds. You reach the higher shoulder, and the view opens wider. Now you can see multiple drainages, each one waking up in its own way. Some channels are carrying thin, fast water, more orange than brown. Some are still dry, but you can see wetting fronts moving down slope. The surface darkens in irregular patches, like a map being shaded in. You realize the storm is not uniform. It is a patchwork, dumping harder on one ridge, lighter on another. That unevenness matters because it tells erosion where to focus. If Uplift built the relief weather chooses where to spend it, you listen to the soundscape and it changes as the rain angle shifts. The wind pushes the rain in sheets and the microphone catches the rush. Then a lull, and you hear the land itself again. Little collapses, small slaps of mud, a faint cracking pop from cooling or wetting rock. These are not dramatic sounds, but they are constant. Constant is how landscapes win. The ranger squats and points to a spot near the trail edge. A thin layer of water is sliding over a harder sandstone bed. It looks harmless until you see the tiny waves, the ripples in the film. Those ripples are moving sediment grains, sorting them by size. The ranger tells you to watch the boundary where the water hits a softer band. The softer band undercuts faster, and a micro ledge forms. A small overhang develops in minutes, and then it breaks. A clump drops, and the water takes it, and the ledge retreats. Scale that up, the ranger says, and you get your pillars and alcoves. Alternating beds, different resistance, the same physics at every size. You record close to the ground, because this is the story in miniature. The sound is a soft rasp, like sand being poured onto wet cloth. It is almost soothing until you remember what it means. It means the mountain is being converted back into parts. It means the stripes are not a painting, they are inventory. The rain begins to ease, just slightly, not stopping, just changing texture from hard drops to a steadier curtain. The cloud ceiling lightens at the edges and the ridge colors shift again. Wet Danxia is darker, more saturated, like pigments finely given water. It is beautiful in the way bruises can be beautiful. You feel the pull of that beauty, and it annoys you, because beauty here is just timing, an accident of wetness and light. The ranger tells you that storms like this are why the landforms are so sharp. Not constant drizzle, but bursts, intense enough to cut, spaced enough to dry. Drying matters because it hardens crusts and sets cracks. Wet matters because it lubricates seams and adds weight. The cycle is the sculptor, and it works faster than you think. You ask, quietly, how old these landforms are, the ridges and gullies you can see. The ranger answers carefully, because this question is a trap. The layers are old, they say, laid down long ago in basins, but the shapes, the dramatic relief, are younger. Uplift exposed the stack, and then erosion began its carving. So the rock is ancient, but the scenery is comparatively new. You digest that, and your brain does what it always does at night. It tries to pin down numbers, to make time behave. But the land refuses, because deep time does not fit in your pocket. The rain thins further, and you can see more clearly now. The flood in the channel is still running, still brown, but not as wild. It has passed its peak, spent its first energy, and now it carries on with purpose. The debris fan at the base of the slump is growing, a low mound of fresh material. Every minute, a few more clumps drop from the scar edge. Each drop is small, but each drop is permanent. You watch a darker band near the scar begin to sag. It is subtle, a slow bending, like a tired shelf. The ranger notices too, and they guide you another few steps away. They do not want you under anything that looks like it is thinking. You realize you are not just watching erosion, you are negotiating with it. You move along the ridge traverse now, because the direct route back is compromised. The ranger explains it plainly. The lower trail crosses beneath slopes that just got soaked. Even if the rain stops, the danger increases for a while. Water takes time to seep into seams, and gravity takes time to act on it. The worst failures can come after the storm, when everyone relaxes. Congratulations. The most dangerous moment is often the calm. You follow the ranger along a higher path, narrower but more stable. It runs along a bedding plane that dips into the hill, locking the layers. You can feel the difference under your feet. Less slippage, less crumble. Still, the surface is gritty, like wet sandpaper. Your boots pick up red mud, and each step leaves a dark print. Those prints will last until the next drying cycle. Then they will flake away. Your presence here is temporary, and the land will erase it on schedule. The wind picks up again, but now the air is cooler. It carries the smell of wet sediment, iron, and clay, and something faintly organic. You pass a patch of shrubs again, and the leaves are glossy with moisture. Water beads on them, then drops, adding to the runoff. Even plants become part of the drainage system in a storm. Roots hold some soil, but not all, and not forever. As you climb, you see small rivulets crossing the trail. Each one cuts a tiny notch at the trail edge, and you can imagine maintenance crews later. They will shovel, compact, install little drains, and call it management. The land will accept their work. Briefly, then continue. This is the park as a treaty zone, a negotiated ceasefire with gravity. Your radio crackles again, and you hear instructions being updated. They are sending staff to a junction, directing visitors away from the drainage corridors. The language is polite, but the goal is survival. Keep to elevated boardwalks. Avoid gullies and channels. Do not linger near cliff bases. All the things people ignore until they see a hillside move. You continue the traverse and the ridge offers a new reveal. From this angle, you can see the layers are not perfectly horizontal. They tilt gently, like a stack of books left in a hot car. That tilt is subtle enough to be missed from the main platforms, but it controls everything. Where gullies form, where cliffs stand, where slumps peel away. The ranger points out a set of straight lines, cutting across the slope. Joint sets, they say, fractures that formed as the rock was stressed and lifted. These fractures do not care about layer boundaries. They slice through multiple beds, creating blocks. When water gets into them, it wedges, it expands, it weakens. Then blocks detach along clean planes, as if the rock had been pre-cut. That is why some cliffs fail suddenly, without warning dribble. Not all erosion is patient. Some of it is scheduled, then abrupt. You reach an exposed section of ridge, and the wind hits you hard. It pushes at your shoulders, and you lean into it instinctively. The drop off to one side is not sheer, but it is enough to convince you. You keep your steps measured, and you keep your microphone close. The wind noise is strong, but beneath it, you hear a faint rattling. Sand grains are bouncing along the surface, saltating in little hops. Even in rain season, wind contributes its share. It dries the surface after storms, it moves loose particles, it scours edges. Erosion here is not a single tool. It is a full crew, taking shifts. The rain becomes a drizzle now, and the clouds begin to lift slightly. Light breaks through in fragments, and the ridges glow again. Wet colors are richer, but shadows are deeper, and the stripes look more dramatic. It is the kind of view that makes people forget danger. The ranger does not forget. They keep you moving because dusk does not negotiate either. You have to reach the main overlook area before the light fails. Not because you cannot walk in the dark, but because you cannot see what is moving. In low light, the land hides its warnings, and it already proved it can change in less than a minute. As you traverse, you pass a section where the trail skirts a cliff. The cliff face shows a clean break, a vertical plane that looks like it was sawed. That is a joint-controlled face, the ranger says. It is stable until it is not, because stability is a matter of friction. Water reduces friction, and time supplies weight. You touch the face lightly, just with your fingertips. It feels cool and slightly gritty, and your fingers come away with red smudge. Even the hard beds are shedding. They just shed slower, like a stubborn person pretending they are fine. You come to a place where the ridge widens, and the ranger pauses. They want you to see something before you move on. Across the valley, a long slope shows a series of stepped failures, small scallops, one above another, like bite marks. Each one is a past slump, each one exposing lighter rock beneath. From here, you can read the history of storms like rings on a tree. Not exact dates, but a pattern of weakness repeating. Where the clay bands outcrop, failures cluster. Where thicker sandstone dominates, slopes hold longer. Lithology, the ranger says, the kind of rock. Then they add the other word, structure. The way it is arranged, lithology tells you how it breaks. Structure tells you where it breaks. You repeat that silently because it is the simplest map you can carry. You keep walking, and you start to notice how the path designers followed those rules. Boardwalks cross unstable zones quickly. Trails stay on bedding planes that dip into slopes. Viewpoints sit on benches of more resistant beds. None of it is random. It is engineering shaped by geology, shaped by ancient rivers, shaped by tectonics, a chain of cause and effect long enough to make you sleepy. But the stakes keep you awake because the ground is still wet. You pass another monitoring stake, this one with a small reflective tag. The ranger stops and checks it. Not closely, just visually. They look for changes, for widening cracks, for new deformation. It is like checking a patient's bandages after surgery. They tell you these stakes are surveyed, measured over time. Millimeters of movement become warnings months later. Danxia does not always fail suddenly. Sometimes it creeps, slowly, then gives up when saturated. Creep is the quiet part of disaster, the part that makes you complacent. You record the ranger's explanation, and you keep your voice low. You do not want to turn this into a lecture. You want it to feel like walking through a living diagram, because that is what you are doing. The rain finally stops, not abruptly, but with a thinning that becomes absence. Drops fall from shrubs and ledges, delayed, like the storm's afterthoughts. The air feels cleaner, and the dust smell is replaced by wet rock. Steam rises faintly from sunlit patches, as if the land is exhaling. This is the moment people come out again. Convinced the danger ended, the ranger mutters something under their breath. And you do not ask what. You both know the danger has just changed form. Now the slopes are heavy, the seams are lubricated, and gravity is patient. You approach the main overlook zone, and you hear people again. Voices return, louder now, excited by the drama. Some are asking what happened, pointing toward the scar. Staff members stand at junctions, redirecting foot traffic. They smile with the weary politeness of people managing humans and geology simultaneously. You step onto a boardwalk, and the sound changes under your boots. Wood planks, wet, slightly slick, with water dripping off edges. The boardwalk feels like safety, but it is really separation, a thin barrier between your soft body and the soft rock's bad habits. The ranger leads you to a viewpoint where you can see the slump scar from a safer angle. Here, the scar looks smaller than it felt. It is a slice taken out of a striped wall, maybe the size of a building. But you know how quickly it moved, and you know that speed is the threat. Scale does not matter when acceleration enters the conversation. You set your microphone on the rail, shielded from wind now, and you record the aftermath. The channel below is still running muddy. The water has carved deeper along the bend where the slump fed it. Fresh debris is piled at the inside curve, and the water is already sorting it. Fine sediment is carried away, leaving coarser fragments behind. The river is making a new bed out of a new collapse. This is Danxia's secret economy, and it never closes. Uplift creates height. Height creates slope. Slope invites water. Water converts rock into transport. Transport removes material, which increases relief, which invites more water. It is a feedback loop dressed up as scenery. You watch a staff member down below, far away, standing near a closed trail segment. They are looking at the slope like it might speak. In a way, it does. Through cracks and bulges and fresh debris. They are listening with their eyes. the way experienced people do, you realize you have been doing the same all day. Learning to read rock posture, like reading an animal's mood. The ranger asks if you got the audio you needed. You answer honestly, yes, and also more than you wanted. They nod because that is the correct outcome here. No one comes to a fragile landscape and leaves with less respect, at least not if they are paying attention. Late afternoon light begins to return properly now, angled and warm. It hits the wet ridges and the colors deepen again. Reds become wine, tans become caramel, grays become slate. The stripes look freshly painted, like the storm did restoration work. But you know the storm also did demolition, and both are true. You begin the next leg of the day, the one the ranger warned would feel exposed. A longer ridge traverse to reach the exit route before dusk. The direct lower trail is still closed, and it will stay that way until inspection. You could wait here, sheltered by boardwalks and staff. But waiting means dark, and dark means colder, and cold means mistakes. So you choose to move while you still have light, even if the route is longer. The ranger signs you out with another staff member and gives you a last set of instructions. Stay on the ridge path. Do not step onto fresh debris. Avoid the edges where joints cut clean faces. If you hear cracking, do not investigate. Congratulations, you are being told not to follow your personality. You start along the ridge path as the park begins to thin of visitors. Families head back toward buses, shoes squeaking on wet boards. The air is filled with that post-storm chatter. People relieved and energized. You are not energized. Your jacket is heavy with rainwater, and your shoulders feel like they borrowed someone else's fatigue. You walk anyway because movement is warmer than worry. The ridge path pulls you away from the noise and into a quieter kind of risk. Here, the danger is not a flood you can see. It is the possibility of a block detaching behind your back, politely, without drama. The light is slanting now, and the wet rock looks varnished. It shines in patches, and those patches are not beauty. They are slickness. You place each boot with the care of someone crossing a kitchen floor after someone spilled oil. Congratulations. You are tiptoeing across a mountain like it is a bad restaurant. The ridge rises and falls in small humps like the land is breathing slowly. On the lee side, the wind drops off and you can finally hear details again. Water is still moving even after the storm's headline has ended. It trickles from the seams and falls in occasional drops that sound like slow applause. Each drop hits soft sediment and makes a tiny crater that will be gone by morning. You pass a spot where the trail shoulder has slumped a few centimeters. Not a collapse, just a sag, like the path is getting tired too. The gravel edge is cracked, and the crack is aligned with a darker band in the rock. That is bedding, and it is also a suggestion. The suggestion is that the trail is only as stable as the layer beneath it. You stop and lower the microphone close to the ground. You listen for the sound of creep, which is mostly the sound of nothing. Then, a faint, granular hiss, like someone rubbing flour between their hands. It is sediment shifting, settling, rearranging itself into the easiest shape. Gravity is not an event here, it is a habit. The ridge path angles along the dip of the layers, and the ranger's earlier lesson returns. When bedding planes dip into the hill, they lock like shingles. When they dip out, they become slides waiting for water. You look at the slope below you, and you try to read its posture. It is steeper there, and the stripes look slightly tilted toward the open air. That is the geometry you do not stand under, especially after rain. So you stay on the ridge spine, even though the wind grabs at you. The wind is cold now, and it smells clean in the way wet stone smells clean. It carries less dust because the dust is stuck to everything as mud. That mud is temporary though, and you can already see it drying at the edges. Thin crusts form fast in this climate, sealing the surface like a cheap glaze. Crust is helpful for hikers and disastrous for infiltration. The next rain will run off faster because the ground will refuse to drink. You are watching the landscape learn its own worst habits. As you round a bend, the view opens to a wider basin of striped hills. In the distance, the famous ridges look calm again, like they are posing. Forget the postcard. This calm is a pause, not a personality. You can still see the storm's work in subtle places if you know where to look. Small fans of new sediment at the mouths of tiny channels. Fresh, darker streaks where water found a seam and used it. A few pale scars, lighter rock exposed where a skin peeled away. The park will not advertise those scars, but they are the real update. You keep walking, and you realize your boots are leaving a trail of red stamps. Each stamp is a temporary signature. By tomorrow, sun and wind will dry it, and foot traffic will blur it. By next week, another storm will erase it completely. That is the bargain here. You get to exist for a moment, and the land gets to pretend you never did. The path drops slightly into a shallow saddle between ridges. Here, the wind funnels, and you hear a new sound, a thin, high whistle, like air squeezed through a bottle. It is coming from a crack in a nearby wall, a joint widened by time. The crack is packed with wet sediment, and water is still draining through it. The whistle is not air alone. It is air mixed with grit, a tiny sandblaster operating at no cost with no off switch. You kneel close, and the sound becomes sharper, almost delicate. You can imagine the crack widening over years, not by force, but by persistence. Water enters, sediment follows, sediment expands and contracts with wetting and drying. Then frost in winter, if the temperature dips low enough, wedges the seam open further. Freeze and thaw is another employee on erosion's payroll. It is slow work, but it is reliable. And reliable is how rock loses. You stand again, and your knees remind you that you are not made for ridgelines. The sky to the west is clearing, but not fully. Clouds are thinning into strips, and the sun slips through in narrow beams. Those beams spotlight parts of the hills, turning them into stage sets. A red ridge ignites for a minute, then dims as the beam shifts. You watch the light move, and it looks like the land is changing color. It is not changing, not really. It is just being revealed in different ways, like a bruise under different lamps. You follow the ridge toward the exit route, and the park infrastructure thins. Boardwalk becomes packed dirt, then gravel, then a narrow path with rocks set as steps. The steps are slick, and you hold the railing when it exists. When it does not, you slow down and place your feet like you are negotiating. You are negotiating with friction, with wet clay, with your own tired ankles. Below you, a shallow channel is still carrying water, but now it is quieter. It murmurs low and busy, like someone talking in another room. You can hear pebbles clicking in the flow, each click a small collision. Those pebbles are being moved because the storm gave the water enough energy. Energy is the currency here. The water spends it on transport, and the land pays with material. You stop at a turnout where the ridge path crosses near a small exposure. The rock face is a clean slice through several stripes, now wet and darker. This is a chance to read the layers with your eyes and hands. You touch a coarse sandstone band, and it feels gritty, like old sandpaper. You touch a finer siltstone band, and it feels smoother, almost soapy. That smoothness is a warning label. Fine grains pack tight, hold water, and lose strength when saturated. It is the difference between a dry cookie and a wet one. You would not build a house on the wet one, but humans keep trying. The path continues, and you begin to see signs of the human layer returning. Small solar lights along the trail edge. A maintenance shed tucked behind a ridge shoulder. A few staff members walking with radios, scanning slopes like they are reading faces. You pass one of them, and they nod without stopping. They are not sightseeing. They are checking for secondary failures, the aftershocks of rain. Because the storm is over, but the consequences are still draining. The ridge path finally brings you to a higher overlook, quieter than the main platforms. From here, the slump scar you witnessed is visible, but distant. It looks like a pale smear across the striped wall, like someone dragged an eraser. It is smaller at this distance, and that is the trick distance plays. Distance turns hazards into patterns. Up close, the pattern is a moving wall of mud and rock. You lean on the railing and you record your voice again, low and steady. You explain what you saw without turning it into spectacle. A clay-rich seam absorbed water, swelled, and lost strength. Runoff undercut the base, removing support. Then the overlying sandstone, heavier and rigid, slid along the lubricated plane. It broke into blocks where joints cut through, and it became a debris flows meal. Simple cause and effect, stretched over ancient layers and modern minutes. The sun lowers further, and the temperature drops with it. Wet rock cools faster than dry rock, and you feel the chill in your hands. You tuck the recorder closer to your body because electronics hate damp cold. So do your fingers, but you do not have a warranty. You begin the final stretch toward the park boundary, and the path turns through a notch. The notch is narrow enough that you feel the walls close in again. Not as tight as the gully earlier, but enough to make you listen. In narrow places, sound tells you more than sight. You hear a small pop, sharp and quick, from somewhere in the rock. Thermal contraction, maybe, or a tiny piece releasing after being soaked, then cooled. It is not dramatic, but it makes you pause. You look up, and you do not see movement. You do not wait for a second pop. You keep walking, because the correct response to a mountain making noises is to stop being underneath it. The notch opens, and you step into a broader area where the visitor road is visible below. A bus idles in the distance, a low hum that feels alien here. Human machinery has a steady confidence. Geology does not. Geology is patient, uneven, and full of surprise. You descend toward the road, and the trail surface changes again. Wet gravel becomes damp-packed earth, and then a wooden walkway near a small gate. At the gate, a ranger station light is already on, a warm square of yellow in the cooling air. The ranger who guided you earlier is there again, talking to another staff member. They glance at you, and their eyes flick briefly to your boots, then your recorder. They ask if you are all right. You answer yes, because you still have all your parts. They ask if you stayed on the ridge route. You answer yes, because you have learned that honesty is cheaper than rescue. They nod, and then they tell you the lower trail will stay closed overnight. Inspection in the morning, after the slopes have had time to settle. That is the phrase they use, settle, like the hills are just deciding where to sit. But settling is another word for moving without warning. You sign a log because humans love paperwork. The land does not sign anything back. You walk past the gate and onto the road shoulder. The asphalt feels strange under your boots, too smooth, too certain. Your ears keep listening for water and grit, but now you hear engines and distant voices. Civilization returns in small doses, and it feels louder than it should. You ride a shuttle back toward the visitor area, and the window fogs with your breath. Outside, the striped hills slide past, darkening into silhouettes. In silhouette, they look stable again. That is the night trick. Night hides the texture, the seams, the fresh scars. It makes everything look finished, but the hills are not finished. They are just between edits. At the visitor center, people cluster under lights, looking at maps and buying hot drinks. You move through them quietly, wet jacket squeaking slightly when you shift. Your body wants warmth, but your mind wants to replay the slump again. It keeps showing you the moment the wall detached, the slow sag before the drop. That pause is what bothers you most. The pause is where your instincts fail, because it looks like nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. And then everything happens. You find a small sheltered corner outside, away from chatter, and you listen to your recordings. The audio is a mix of wind, rain, and the low roar of muddy flow. In the background, there are human voices too, faint, excited. The contrast is uncomfortable. The land is rearranging itself, and humans are narrating like it is a performance. You turn the volume down because you are tired of humans. You walk toward the lodging area on the edge of town, a modest place meant for field crews and off-season travelers. The path is lit by street lamps, and puddles reflect the orange light. Your boots splash, and the sound is mundane, almost insulting after the day you had. Inside, the air smells like detergent and warm water. You hang your jacket, and it drips onto a tray like a slow leak. You place the recorder on a towel, and you check it like it is a small animal. It survived, which feels like luck. You shower, and the water runs red at first, carrying Danxia dust down the drain. That dust is ancient, and now it is in the plumbing. Congratulations, you have introduced deep time to a municipal system. You lie down, and the bed feels too soft, like it cannot support the kind of day you had. Outside, wind moves through trees, and you try to decide if you can hear rain returning. The forecast said a second band overnight, weaker but possible. You do not want it, but wanting is not a factor. You close your eyes, and the last image in your mind is the pale scar on the striped wall. A wound that will oxidize, darken, and blend back into the palette. But it will never be the same contour again. That is the rule. The color can return, the shape will not. Sleep comes in pieces because your body is tired and your mind is still walking gullies. In the night, you wake once to a faint tapping on the window. Not heavy rain, just a brief sprinkle testing the surface. You listen and you can almost hear the hills outside responding. A soft increase in dripping, a quiet drainage clearing its throat, then it stops again, and the silence returns, slightly damp. You fall back asleep with the uncomfortable comfort that the land keeps working without you. It is rude, but consistent. When morning comes, it arrives cooler than yesterday's dawn. The air feels cleaner, washed by the storm, and the night's light sprinkle. You step outside before the town fully wakes, and you can smell wet earth and stone. The sky is pale, and the horizon is sharp again. You ride back toward the park with a ranger you met at the gate, because you asked for access to document the aftermath. They agreed, but with conditions. Stay on approved routes, no approaching fresh scars, no stepping onto debris fans, no matter how tempting they look. Secondary failures are common after saturation. The hills are still deciding what they can let go. You nod, and you mean it. Yesterday taught you that curiosity has a weight. The park entrance is quieter at dawn, and the boardwalks are damp and dark. Footprints from yesterday are gone, blurred by rain and wind, but new footprints exist, crisp in the soft mud near the edges. Staff tracks, inspection tracks, the kind of footprints that mean work, not fun. You step onto the main boardwalk, and the wood is cool under your boots. It creaks softly, and the sound feels almost intimate in the empty air. The striped ridges ahead look darker because they are still holding moisture. Moisture changes everything. It adds weight, it reduces friction, it highlights seams. It makes the land more honest about where it breaks. As you walk toward the overlook, you see the slump scar from farther away than yesterday. In the morning light, it is unmistakable. A pale cut through the colored bands, like the landscape briefly showed its underside. The stripes continue across it, but interrupted, displaced, torn. It looks like a page ripped out of the file cabinet. The ranger beside you does not romanticize it. They call it a failure surface, and they point out the head scarp at the top. A curved break where the slide detached, like a bite taken out of a shelf. Below it, the debris fan spreads into the channel, a fresh mound of mixed sizes. Fine mud smeared across everything, and larger blocks resting like they finally got tired. The channel water is lower now, but still stained. It runs the color of weak tea with rust, carrying the finest particles away. The ranger explains that turbidity can last for days. Even after a short storm, fine grains stay suspended because they are small enough to be carried like smoke in water. Those grains will settle later in quieter pools, in low bends, in places that become temporary basins. Sediment always finds a place to rest, eventually. Rest is just another phase before the next move. You stop at a designated safe viewpoint, and you set your recorder on the railing. You record the morning soundscape. It is quieter than yesterday, but not silent. Drips fall from ledges. A distant trickle runs through a small channel. Wind moves across wet rock. softer now because grit is glued down. A bird calls from somewhere, braver than yesterday's embarrassed one. You narrate softly because this is where the story shifts. Yesterday was action. Today is aftermath, which is its own kind of violence. The violence of permanence, the kind that does not explode, but does not reverse. The ranger gestures toward the scar and points out a smaller crack above it. A tension crack, they say. A sign the slope behind the scar may still adjust. Not necessarily today, not necessarily this week. But the crack exists, and it is a note in the margin. They have placed a temporary barrier farther along the boardwalk, limiting access. You can see the tape bright against the muted hills. Humans love bright colors. When they want to stop other humans, the land does not need tape. It stops you with gravity. You ask the ranger how the park handles changes like this, because the iconic view is part of why people come. They answer with the weary practicality of someone who has had this conversation too many times. They document it, update maps, adjust routes, and keep people away from fresh hazards. They do not rebuild the hill because you cannot rebuild a stratified slope with a shovel. They let it be because letting it be is the safest option. Management here is not control. It is negotiation, and sometimes it is just acceptance. You walk with them along the perimeter route, staying on stable boardwalk sections. The mud beside the walkway is still soft enough to hold detail. You can see tiny rivulets etched into it, like miniature versions of the gullies. They formed overnight from dripping and small runoff pulses. Even when the storm stops, water continues to carve quietly. You pause at one of these rivulets and you point the microphone toward it. The sound is almost nothing, a faint trickle, a delicate tapping as droplets fall. If you did not know the context, it would sound peaceful. But you know this is the same process that made yesterday's roar, just smaller, slower, patient. Erosion does not need to be loud to be effective. You watch a bead of water swell at the edge of a sandstone lip, hesitate, then drop like it just remembered gravity exists. It hits the mud ribbon below, and the ribbon subtly lengthens, one grain at a time. The ranger does not let you follow it. They shift their stance in front of you, casual, like they are blocking sunlight, not risk. They point instead farther upslope to a set of faint steps in the striped face. Not stairs for you, but terraces of failure. Small, older slumps that never made the news. Each step is a place where a softer bed yielded, and a harder bed held long enough to create a ledge. Then the ledge broke and became a new line in the landscape's handwriting. You lean closer to the railing, and you notice something new in the scar. Yesterday, it looked pale and clean, like fresh plaster. Now, in the cooler morning, the surface has already started to freckle. Tiny dots of darker moisture sit in pores, and thin streaks run down along grainy paths. Water is finding microchannels you cannot see from a distance. This is the part tourists never notice because it is too small to photograph. But this is where the next collapse negotiates its contract. The ranger tells you the park will likely leave this scar exposed on purpose, not because they want drama, because a raw face is easier to watch. Fresh surfaces show cracks sooner, seepage sooner, bulging sooner. A weathered slope can hide its intentions under a crust. You glance at the boardwalk supports, metal posts, anchored into more resistant rock. The whole walkway is a statement. Humans will not trust the soft beds. So, we float above them. You take a slow breath and you decide to do the hard thing. You keep your recorder off the dramatic scar and you aim it at the ordinary hillside beside it, because the ordinary hillside is where the next chapter is already forming. You walk with the ranger along the limited route and you stop at a small educational pullout. Here, the stripes are close enough to see the textures again. Coarse sandstone, like baked sugar. Fine siltstone, like compacted flour. And between them, a thin clay seam that looks almost glossy, even when it is barely damp. The ranger tells you clay is a troublemaker because clay plays with water. It absorbs, it swells, it softens, it becomes a lubricant. Sandstone mostly just gets wet, then dries, then sheds a few grains, like it is embarrassed. You crouch at the edge of the boardwalk and you hold the microphone near a tiny trickle. The sound is a quiet ticking, droplets landing on a grain pile. Then a softer sound underneath, like a sigh through a straw. The ranger follows your gaze and you both see it. A narrow seam in the rock is breathing water. Not a stream, not a drip line, just seepage. Yesterday's storm filled the rock's pores, and now the hillside is slowly draining itself. It is like a sponge you stopped squeezing. The ranger says this is why the danger lingers after rain. Seepage increases pore pressure, and pore pressure steals friction. Friction is what keeps a slope pretending it is stable. You stand and you feel the temperature shift again as a breeze slides over the ridge. The wind is drier than yesterday, and it carries a faint mineral smell. Wet iron, wet clay, and something dusty waiting to return. The ranger checks their radio, and you catch a few clipped words. Inspection teams are still out. Some trails will reopen later, some will not. The park is rewriting the day's map in real time because the land rewrote the land. You keep walking and you notice the smallest human detail. A thin line of red mud splashed up on the boardwalk rail like a watermark from the storm. The color is so vivid it looks unreal, but it is not paint, it is rust, transported. It is ancient basin sediment, briefly mobile again. You reach a spot where the boardwalk passes above a shallow side gully. Yesterday, it was a dry crease. Now, there is a small ribbon of water in the bottom, moving slowly, the color of weak tea. You can see tiny grains sliding along the bed, and the water is sorting them. Fine particles stay suspended, making the water cloudy. Coarser grains roll and click and settle quickly when the flow slows. You are watching a tiny version of how whole rivers build deltas. Only this delta is a small fan of mud behind a pebble. The ranger tells you something that lands heavier than it should. They say Danxia is not one rock type. It is a stack of moods deposited under different climates and energies. Some layers came from rivers, some from floodplains, some from wind-blown dust. Then time buried it all, pressed it, cemented it. Then tectonics lifted it, gently enough to keep the stripes readable. Then erosion got its hands in. You stare at the gully and you picture it backwards. First, a basin collecting sediment like a slow garbage bin. then burial, then pressure, then chemical cement turning dirt into rock, then uplift, which feels like someone slowly tilting the whole file cabinet upright, then water carving pages out of it, as if the cabinet was never meant to stand. The ranger watches you doing this mental rewind, and they add one more piece. They say the uplift here is tied to far larger forces, the ongoing push and pull of plates. Not a single fault popping off like a movie. More like a region being gradually elevated and warped. A slow stiffening, a long bend, a patient rise. You think of two shopping carts colliding in a parking lot. Only the carts are continents, and the collision takes millions of years. And the result is not a dented bumper, but a whole region lifted high enough for rivers to bite into it. You keep moving, and you find a place where the stripes are tilted just enough to see the structure. The layers dip gently, like books slid on a shelf. The ranger points with their pen to the direction of dip. They tell you that dip controls which slopes are safer. If the layers tilt into the hill, they act like shingles. If they tilt out of the hill, they act like a stack of plates waiting to slide. You look across the valley and test this idea. The slopes that look smooth and intact tend to be those shingled slopes. The slopes that look scalloped and scarred tend to be those plate slopes. The land is following its own geometry. You do not have to guess. Once you know what to look for, a small setback arrives, and it is not dramatic, but it is enough to tighten your throat. A faint crack sound, like snapping a dry twig, comes from somewhere downslope. You stop, walking instantly. The ranger stops too, and their posture shifts from tour guide to triage. You both listen. Nothing else follows. No rumble. No movement you can see. But the ranger does not shrug it off. They guide you a few steps back along the boardwalk, away from any overhang. They say secondary failures can be small. A block detaches along a joint. A thin sheet peels along a wet clay seam. Not everything announces itself with a roar. You nod, and you feel your earlier confidence shrink. This is the honest part of the morning. The storm ended, and the land is still restless. You continue on, and the ranger leads you to a map board near a junction. The printed map already has temporary tape on it, marking closed sections. A staff member stands there with a marker, updating notes like a teacher in a classroom. They point to a detour route, and they speak quietly to the ranger. You catch enough to understand. The slump you saw was not the only movement. A smaller slide happened overnight on a different face, less visible, but close enough to a trail to matter. The staff member says they heard it late night, a dull thud that shook loose gravel. They went out with lights, saw fresh debris, and closed the segment. You look out at the painted hills again, and you feel the sarcasm return. People call this place painted, as if it is decorative, but it behaves like a construction site that never got finished. Loose material everywhere, warning tape, closures, inspections. Only the contractor is gravity, and it never misses a shift. You follow the approved detour, and it takes you along a higher, more stable spine. Here, the wind is stronger, and the air is cooler. The rock surface is drying in patches, and the drying creates a thin crust. You can see it where the mud changes from dark to matte. Crust forms fast because the sun and wind work like fans in a drying room. Crust feels like improvement. Crust is also a trap. The ranger says the next rain will run off faster where crust seals the surface. Infiltration drops, runoff increases, and concentrated runoff is what turns a gentle slope into a gully. You look down at the little channels etched into the mud beside the boardwalk. They are already hardening into miniature gullies, their edges crisping as they dry. It is eerie to watch the land set like concrete, even though it is not concrete at all. It is just fine sediment playing house. You stop at a bend where the view opens, and you can see the main famous ridges again. They are still striped, still absurdly colorful, still unreal. But now you notice something you missed yesterday. Not all stripes are equal. Some bands are thicker, more resistant, forming ribs. Some are thin and weak, recessed, forming grooves. The pattern of ribs and grooves repeats, and it creates the iconic fluted texture. The landscape is basically a layer cake being eaten by weather. Hard layers are the frosting that holds for a minute. Soft layers are the sponge that disappears first. You place your hand on the railing and feel the chill of metal. The morning is still young, but your mind feels older. You think about the basin that made these layers. You picture rivers carrying sediment in pulses, flood seasons dumping sand, quiet seasons settling mud. Then you picture burial, miles of overlying material pressing down. Then you picture cementation, mineral-rich water moving through pores, gluing grains together. It is slow chemistry, like a patient person fixing a crumbling wall, one drip at a time. Then Uplift undoes the burial, not by removing weight, but by raising the whole pile. And erosion takes over, shaving it down again. The cycle is rude. Deposition builds, tectonics lifts, erosion destroys. Then, somewhere else, deposition builds again with the destroyed material. Nothing is wasted. It is just relocated. The ranger checks their watch, and you realize time is moving. Visitors will arrive soon, and the quiet will end. You want one more moment with the aftermath before the human noise returns. So you ask, carefully, if you can take a short side spur to a designated safe point, not into a gully, not near the scar, just a small platform that overlooks a drainage fan. The ranger considers, then nods. They say 5 minutes. They mean 3. You walk the spur and the platform is empty. Below, the drainage fan spreads like a hand, fingers of sediment extending into the basin. The fan is darker near the channel, lighter at the edges where only fine mist reached. You can see where the storm deposited new layers on top of older layers, sediment on sediment, Danxia making new Danxia in miniature. You set the microphone down and record the sound of the fan. It is almost nothing. A faint trickle, a soft rustle, as wind moves across drying grains. Then, unexpectedly, a tiny rattle. A pebble shifts, rolls half an inch, and stops. It is such a small movement, but it feels like a message. The land is still rearranging itself even now. The ranger calls you back with a quiet cough. You return to the main path, and you can already hear the first visitors in the distance. Their voices are bright, too awake for this place. The ranger leads you toward a larger overlook, where staff are setting up cones and signs. One sign says the trail is closed for safety. Another says please stay on the boardwalk. The language is polite. The meaning is simple. The hills are not done. A family stops near the sign and asks what happened. They point toward the pale scar. The staff member explains calmly that a small landslide occurred during yesterday's storm. Small, they say, because it is safer to use small words with nervous people. The family takes pictures anyway. You watch them frame the scar, the stripes, the morning light. They are collecting the wound as proof they were here. The hill does not care. You keep walking, and the ranger points out a patch of vegetation planted along a slope. Low grasses, carefully spaced, their roots meant to hold surface material. Revegetation, the ranger says. It helps reduce surface erosion in some spots. It does not stop slumps along clay seams. Roots cannot stitch a lubricated bedding plane back together. Plants help with the skin. They cannot fix the bones. You stare at the planted patch, and you feel the human desire behind it. We want stability. We want the stripes to stay arranged. We want the view to hold still long enough for our schedules. The land offers a compromise. It will slow down in some places, speed up in others. It will accept your grasses, then send a storm to test them. You and the ranger pass another monitoring stake. This one has a small reflective strip and a number. The ranger tells you these points are surveyed after storms. They measure tiny changes in position. Millimeters matter because millimeters accumulate. A slope rarely moves once and stops. It moves in episodes, each storm adding a little more deformation. Then one day, the accumulated weakness hits a threshold, and the slope decides. Thresholds are the cruelest part of nature. Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. Then it does. You find yourself staring at the pale scar again. You can see faint runnels already carved into it, like fine scratches. Those runnels are new channels forming. They will deepen with each rain. They will carry sediment down to the debris fan. The scar will soften, weather, oxidize, and eventually blend in color. But the channels will remain as new lines, a new pattern over the old pattern. Danxia does not get repaired. It gets overwritten. The ranger's radio crackles again. They listen, then reply. A team wants to check a tension crack above the main scar. They will approach from the side, not from below. You remember the thin line the ranger pointed out earlier, the note in the margin. You ask if you can accompany them from a safe distance, just to document the process. The ranger hesitates, then nods again. They say you stay behind them. You do not wander. You do not lean over anything. You agree. You mean it. You follow them along a restricted staff route, still on boardwalk, but away from the main visitor flow. The soundscape changes immediately. Fewer voices, more wind, more small water noises dripping from hidden ledges. You approach a section of slope where the stripes tilt outward. Here the rock face looks smooth in places, slick from wet clay. The ranger points to the tension crack. From this angle, you can see it clearly. A thin, dark line cutting across the upper part of the slope, parallel to the bedding. It is not wide, but it is continuous. The ranger tells you it formed when the upper mass began to move. The top pulled away slightly from the stable material behind it. That separation is the crack. It is a warning that the slope could move again. Not guaranteed, but possible. possible is enough. A second staff member arrives with a tablet and a measuring tape. They look tired, like someone who slept with one ear open. They kneel near a marked point, and they measure the crack width at a few spots. They call out numbers softly, and the ranger notes them. You record the sound of their voices because it is part of the human layer of Danxia. Not tourists, caretakers, people whose job is to argue with physics. The staff member points to damp streaks below the crack. They say seepage is still active. Water is draining along the seam. That keeps the clay wet. Wet clay stays weak. Weak clay keeps the risk alive. You feel a small wave of gratitude for the boardwalk under your feet. Then you feel annoyed at yourself for needing gratitude from planks. Congratulations, you are a mammal relying on carpentry to safely observe sedimentary failure. The staff member finishes measuring and stands. They recommend the closure stays in place. They will recheck after the next weather system. The ranger nods, and you all step back from the slope without ceremony. No heroic moment, just a decision made from small evidence. This is how hazards are managed, not with certainty, with probabilities and caution. As you walk back toward public routes, the ranger tells you something that shifts your perspective again. They say the Danxia Landforms are not rare because sedimentary layers exist. Sedimentary layers are everywhere. What is rare is the combination. Thick red beds, strong enough to stand as ridges, but weak enough to carve fast. Gentle uplift, enough to expose them without pulverizing them. A climate with dry spells that preserve sharp edges and rain bursts that cut deeply, and enough time in that sweet spot for the landscape to develop its weird architecture. Too wet, and it would round off into softer hills. Too dry, and it would preserve but not carve. Too much tectonic violence, and it would be a broken mess. Too little uplift, and it would still be buried. You are standing in a narrow window of geologic luck, the kind of luck that still tries to kill you during storms. You return to the main boardwalk loop, and the crowds have grown. People cluster at overlooks, pointing, murmuring, taking slow videos. A child asks why the mountains are rainbow. An adult answers because of minerals and leaves it at that. You want to correct them, but you do not, because the full answer is longer and darker. The colors are iron oxidation, yes. But the reason you can see the colors is because erosion stripped away everything that used to cover them. The rainbow exists because the landscape is mid-collapse. You keep walking, and the ranger's shift ends at a junction. They hand you off to another ranger, one who will escort you along the remaining open route. This ranger is quieter, more reserved. They look at your recorder, then at your face. They say, "You saw the slide yesterday." You nod. They say, "Then you understand why we do not let people off path." You nod again. They lead you to an overlook where the stripes stretch into the distance. From here, the famous ridges look calm again. But now you see the new scar as part of a larger pattern. There are other scars, older, faded, subtle. There are slopes with rounded bite marks. There are fans at the base of many gullies, each one a record of past storms. This whole park is a museum of failure surfaces. It just happens to be colorful. The ranger tells you visitors often assume the stripes are painted onto existing hills. They imagine the hills came first and the colors arrived later. but the hills are the stripes. The shape is controlled by the layers, and the layers are controlled by deposition, then controlled by erosion. Everything is causality stacked like sediment. You lean on the railing and let your eyes drift across the ridges. You start to notice how different gullies have different personalities. Some are narrow and deep, cutting quickly into soft beds. Some are wider and shallower, spreading flow over a broader